It's been a bit more than a month since Alva Brazil was shot to death by Houston police officers. The president of the Houston Police Officers Union is here to talk about what happens when police make decisions in seconds that can change lives forever. And I'll ask about the HPD body cam policy, the good and the bad. And speaking of the good and bad, the second annual Galveston Bay report card is out. We'll talk about the health of the watershed that spans nearly 24,000 miles and impacts half the Texas population. That's in this week's Houston Newsmakers.
This is Houston Newsmakers with Cambrell Marshall.
And welcome to Houston Newsmakers, where I'm joined this week by Ray Hunt, the president of the Houston Police Officers Union. Thank you for being here, Ray.
Thanks for having me, Cambrell.
Let's get right to the point of being here early on. It was a bit more than a month ago. Alva Brazil, Cullen Boulevard there, shot to death by Houston police. He had been in the street there. Witnesses say that he had a gun, that he'd been standing in the street, that he'd been firing in the air. When police arrived on the scene, within seconds of the time that they arrived on the scene, Brazil was dead. Now, the challenge going forward is, how do we figure out what happened? With body cams, we were thinking that that would be helpful, but in this case, body cams came on after the fact.
Yeah, the officers weren't dispatched to the call. They were flagged down on it, so they did not punch their body camera on until quickly after the shooting. The body camera goes back and takes the previous 30 seconds, and they have the video that shows the officers walking up to the suspect after he's been shot. And fortunately, we also have cameras from a convenience store that gives surveillance video that actually shows the person with the gun. And the body camera, though, shows a clear picture when the officers walk up that Mr. Brazil still had the gun in his hand, and not only that, but had his finger inside the trigger guard.
There was a lot of speculation when this first happened that he didn't have a gun, that he didn't fire. We had the attorney for the Brazil family on here that said they were still doing investigations and there was no clear indication that he'd been firing the gun at all. Was that, in fact, what some witnesses said? Well,
some witnesses did claim that they had believed that he had been fired in the area. I do know that there were 2 spent rounds in the gun, which means that 2 rounds had been fired at some point. The officers did not hear any gunfire or anything else when they came around that corner and started approaching Mr. Brazil. They really believed that he was simply trying to flag them down, and it wasn't until they got pretty close that they actually saw that he had a gun in his hand, and that's when they ordered him to drop it. And instead of dropping it, he starts to move down with the gun, at which point both officers discharged their firearms and stopped Mr. Brazil.
We can't put ourselves in those officers' shoes, but you go through these trainings all the time where you're trying to figure out what decision to make in a split second. And it really is a tricky thing, is it not, when someone has a gun, when the officer's goal is to go home after their shift, when a gun may or may not be coming down at them.
Yeah, it really is a very quickly evolving situation. When you're talking about officers with a semi-automatic weapon, you're talking about between 4 and 5 rounds can be fired in 1 second. Each round about .20 or .25 per round. So you're looking at a scene that took about 1.5 seconds. And the officers have to make quick second decisions. If you listen to the body camera audio afterwards, you can tell how distraught the officers are, and even the language that they're using. They're breathing heavy. They're like, what was he thinking? One of the officers even turns to a citizen who's in the street and says, well, why was he doing this? And I think you can hear the citizen say he was smoking that stuff.
And some of the witnesses after the fact were saying that he probably wasn't smoking anything. He was going after a horse that he had lost. Was there any validation that in fact was the case?
You know, unfortunately, our local paper editorial page did a big injustice on this case, putting out some information that was just people who were saying things on the scene that had no facts whatsoever. There's no information at all that he was going after a horse. As a matter of fact, we're pretty confident that he was selling narcotics in the area, and we're pretty confident of that because he had a baggie stuffed up his rectum that had multiple illegal pills inside that bag, which is consistent with how people sell dope when they're on the streets.
Now, a lot of folks who have been his supporters, they would say, well, wait, that can't be true. Maybe you planted it, but from the...
Yeah, fortunately, we have the body cameras that are on the entire time. When the officers walk up to the body, the officers do nothing more than remove the gun from his hand. We have witnesses that stay on the scene the entire time that watch that no officer is going into this person's body in any shape, form, or fashion, and the actual narcotics were discovered by the medical examiner, not by the police officers.
When this sort of thing happens, and this sort of thing hasn't been widely reported, has it not?
I don't think we've said it to all the news stations, but unfortunately no one has reported it.
Well, now we're talking about it now.
Right. We appreciate you.
So in this case going forward, I know that the attorney for the Brazil family is maybe thinking about a lawsuit or that sort of thing. You as police officers, how aware are you about the potential for those kinds of things? Maybe as an individual officer, you don't think about that because maybe you can't, but as a union, what's your stance, or how do you get people prepared to deal with those kinds of eventualities or possibilities?
Yeah, we make sure that our officers know that don't think about the legal implications. You think about the safety of yourself and the people around there to make sure that threats are stopped. We have a union that represents them whenever they're acting within the course and scope of their job and are lawfully acting. If someone intentionally and knowingly acts unlawfully, we don't represent that person. But if someone is doing their job in the course and scope of their job and someone comes back and sues that officer, we do represent them, as does the city represent them. This is going to be a completely justified shooting. The mayor has done exactly what he should have done. He released all the evidence that he had as quickly as possible because of the misinformation out there. And again, I blame the Chronicle editorial page for a lot of this misinformation. It was completely irresponsible journalism from the editor of the Chronicle editorial page to put the things out that he put in the editorial that was called "Justified Shooting?" ? I mean, calling us some types of killers and the government agents, and just completely inflammatory stuff that they did. Very, very concerning to us.
There was, in the council, there was a disruption because there were people who were, quote, activists who were saying, you know, this Brazil shooting is unjust, that sort of thing, and creating a lot of havoc, if you will. How do you deal with that going forward when you know the community is kind of in a state of unrest? Yeah,
we make sure that the correct information gets out as quickly as possible. We told the mayor that we want this video released now. We want people to see the gun in his hand. I wouldn't have minded that video being released that morning. Yes, it can jeopardize a case if you're going to a grand jury with something because you taint a jury pool. But I believe it's more important to get the facts out there as quickly as possible to stop this incorrect information that's being spread. The fact that he had a Coke can in his hand and not a gun was just a complete lie. The fact that he was probably putting the gun down and not pointing at the officers, absolutely no evidence whatsoever of that. I mean, the person obviously, unless he had mind-altering drugs in his system, which I believe the toxicology report is going to come back to show that, when he sees the officers coming down the street, you would think that the person, especially a felon, which he was, not allowed to have a gun, would have ditched the gun, but instead he kept it in his hand and kept his finger in the trigger guard.
What do you say to the process now for the body cam program? How do we make that better so that there's no problem with trying to see everything that happens? Because this is one of those things where you can't undo it. It didn't happen until after the cams didn't come on, until after the situation. Does a union have a say in the regulations or the guidelines in terms of when they're on and when they're not on?
We want them on at all times with encounters, and what I'm telling officers is as soon as you put that mic down when you've been dispatched to a call, go ahead and punch it on. This wouldn't have been the case in the Brazil case because the officers weren't dispatched to it. This was something that just happened in a split second. Officers on routine patrol, and the body camera's on standby at all times until you're having an encounter with a citizen. When you punch that on, and it goes back the previous 30 seconds and records from that point until you stop the camera from recording again.
Is there a way to fix it so that whenever the door opens, for example, or something like that, that way it doesn't have to be a conscientious, you know?
There's all kinds of technology out there. It costs lots of money. There's technology when you put the overheads on. There's technology that, you know, you could when you open the door. All that technology is available, but all of that technology costs money, which is the same thing about the fact of the video cameras rolling constantly, for example. Storage of these videos is going to be astronomical costs for people. And the bottom line on this case is everything was caught on video. Surveillance video caught the person in the street. The officer's body camera caught the officers as they're walking up to the suspect after he'd been shot. Everything was caught in this situation, so nothing was jeopardized in this case by the officers. And look, let me say this. The officers didn't have time to even notify the dispatcher where they are or put the car in park. When the shooting finishes and the officers get out to approach the suspect, the car is still in drive and starts going forward, and the officer has to jump back in the car and put it in park. That's how quickly evolving this situation was.
How important is it for you to be able to have all of this video so that it helps you as police officers come away from these kinds of shootings clean? Because there have been so many instances where people have been in shootings, where police officers have been caught in some unjustified shootings, and it casts a net over all of the officers.
The Houston Police Officers Union was in favor of body cameras. We believe that it quickly stopped those people in this case from saying that he had a Coke can and didn't have a gun, because it's very clear, so clear on the body camera, that his finger's actually inside the trigger guard, and you can see that on the body camera. We believe that the body cameras are going to be a very big positive for the community and for our police officers, which is why we support them.
What is the status now in terms of how your officers feel on the street? After Dallas, when we lost so many officers' lives there was a heightened sense of urgency in terms of your safety. We still have that same level of heightened sense of defense in terms of those kinds of issues that are out in the field?
Absolutely. I think it's going to be a long time for people to get away from what happened in Dallas, Texas. And we're still urging our officers to double up, to provide two-person units. We, the Houston Police Officers Union and the Houston Police Foundation, are in the process of purchasing a second vest that is a high-powered rifle vest that will handle a high-powered rifle round to be able to go over the officer's uniform when they're dispatched to these types of shootings. In this case, of course, with the Mr. Brazil situation, the officers wouldn't have had time to do this because it was so quickly evolving. But we are still on very high alert. We hope that the officers never let their guards down, because it is a very dangerous place out there on the streets of Houston right now and throughout the country. Fortunately, 95% of the people of all races are still supporting the police officers, and we've gotten those shows of support all across this city, and we appreciate it.
Must feel good.
It does feel good.
You got a chief that's still wearing the interim label. What's up with that?
This mayor's on his own timeline in selecting a police chief. You know, it's a 4-year term now instead of a 2-year term. He wants to make sure that he has the right person in there, and I would guess that he's going to make a decision pretty quickly. But we clearly support all 3 internal candidates. They're all 3 executive assistant chiefs, and any of those 3 would do a great job for the city of Houston and the citizens of Houston. All
right, Ray Hunt, President of the Houston Police Officers Union. Always good to see you, my friend.
Always good to be here,
Come back and see me again.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Coming up, I was amazed to learn the impact that Galveston Bay has well beyond Southeast Texas. Some impressive numbers and the result of the 2nd annual Galveston Bay Report Card. That's next when Houston Newsmakers continues. Welcome back. When is the last time you've been out on Galveston Bay? It is an amazing body of water that has impacts far beyond what the eye can see. In fact, the Galveston Bay watershed spans more than 24,000 square miles, and half the population of the state of Texas lives within it. I know this because the Galveston Bay Foundation has written it in their latest Galveston Bay Report Card, just released. Bob Stokes is the president of the Galveston Bay Foundation. Welcome. It's good to see you as well.
Thank you.
Lisa Gonzalez is the president and CEO of the Houston Advanced Research Center, responsible for doing a lot of the research that goes into this. And it's fascinating. I was telling them earlier that I've seen the report and I'm such a geek about it. It just kind of really draws you in. Bob, for those people who may not know, talk about what the purpose is of the Galveston Bay Foundation.
Well, we wanted to put together an easy-to-understand report card for the general public. It's got a lot of scientific information in it, but we didn't want it to read like a scientific report. We wanted to boil down the health of Galveston Bay into something that people could understand, and everybody understands report cards. We've all been getting them since we were back in grade school, and so we wanted to kind of boil down the information and make it easy to understand for the general public.
The foundation as a whole, that's not all you do, obviously. There's a lot of other things you do. What's your primary purpose for existence?
Well, our general mission is to preserve and protect the natural resources of Galveston Bay, and we do that in a lot of different ways. We do advocacy work where we're working for clean water. Everybody wants clean water that we can swim in and fish in. We do education work with kids. We get kids out on Galveston Bay. We do conservation work where we're restoring wetlands and restoring oyster reefs, and we do a little bit of research. We have a really neat dolphin research program we're working on. So we have a variety of things, and this was a tool to get our message out to the public.
Lisa, let's talk a little bit about, there were, reading in this, there were indicators. There were a number of indicators, like 19, I think.
That's right.
That you distilled down into basically 6 categories. And how difficult was that? I know yesterday we were talking about this whole event and how it came together. It's interesting how this report card came together based upon what people really wanted to see, as opposed to you telling them what they need to know.
That's right. That's probably the most exciting thing about this report card for us. It's been a 2-year process working between HARC and the Galveston Bay Foundation. And when we started 2 years ago, we went out to the public first to find out what they wanted to know about the Bay, what their questions were, what their concerns were, and then we went into the data and found the data sets that could answer those questions and fashion those into indicators that could be graded for the report card.
Now, you know, when I came home with my report card, I wanted to go ahead and tell Mom, I got A's, I got B's. That's not exactly what the Galveston Bay, the overall report card is what? You gave it a C?
Yeah, so the overall grade for the second year in a row is a C. And we've labeled C as adequate for now, but we also recognize that C is really something that needs to be better. You know, our organization is looking at how we turn a C into an A. How do we get to a straight A Bay? And obviously that's a long-term effort. And so adequate for now, but not necessarily satisfactory. So what do we need to do to improve the health of Galveston Bay as we move forward?
Well, now obviously when you have C, if C is the average, then there are certainly circumstances where you have higher grades and lower grades. And the best grade was about water quality, was it not? And in terms of water quality, why did we come up with that?
That's correct. Yeah, water quality this year, we had a B for water quality last year, and it improved to an A for this year. So we were really excited about that. And water quality includes indicators that revolve around nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus flowing into the bay and dissolved oxygen in the waters of the bay and bayous as well. And so that improvement in grades really continues a long-term trend that we've seen that go all the way back to the implementation of the Clean Water Act back in 1972.
Now, from last year to this year, were there things that you were suggesting should be done to improve, and were they done? Are you tracking that sort of thing to see if that is in fact making a difference in improving those levels?
I mean, I would say that our mission, our efforts have been geared for a long time to improve the health of the bay. So there wasn't necessarily any specific additional actions, other than maybe some funding issues. The state of Texas has an opportunity to invest quite a bit of BP oil spill money on the Texas coast in direct coastal restoration projects. They've got a little flexibility and they can use that money for some other things. And so our message has been, hey, state of Texas, we think this is a really worthy investment. We need to make sure that this oil spill money is used well, used correctly, and used to restore the coast.
In addition to the A, which is the only area that got an A out of the 6, the worst category of the 6 was the habitat. And the habitat included a lot of things, including the grasslands with the video we're seeing there now. Talk about why it got a D, which is something that I would be on restriction for if I got a D. So.
That's right. Well,
grounded. We'd be grounded
absolutely.
for sure.
Well, habitat includes indicators that relate to wetlands, seagrasses, and oyster reefs. And particularly with regards to freshwater wetlands, we've seen declines in that particular habitat type now for many years. And the reason for that is because the freshwater wetlands are in the upper parts of the watershed where most of the human activity, it's where we, place our neighborhoods and, and the other development that goes along with that. Also, oyster reefs, we've seen declines in that habitat going all the way back to 2008 with the impacts from Hurricane Ike, the storm surge from Ike.
We talk about freshland areas when you talk about where the people are building. So we're talking, whenever these subdivisions are built, sometimes they push aside some of these wetlands. Well, we're going to continue to grow.
That's right.
So what's the remedy, or what are some of the suggested remedies for that part of the issue? Because that was not very good. Freshwater wetlands got a D.
Well, I think one of the things that we try to accomplish as an organization is restoration. So we're always looking to restore lost habitats. So we've been working on restoring lost wetlands almost since our inception. We've been around for almost 30 years. We've worked on restoring oyster reef habitat. We've been working on restoring seagrass habitat. There's an advocacy element to make sure that our laws in place protect our habitats as well. And so it's a continuation of those efforts to really concentrate on trying not to lose as much as we might in the future, but also trying to restore some of the lost wetlands that we've already lost.
We've kind of concentrated on 2 of the 6 areas, that water quality and the habitat. There are several others. We're talking about wildlife, coastal change, pollution events and sources, and human health risks. One of the things that got my attention was in the wildlife part, the invasive species. Yes. That kind of got my attention because I'm thinking about carps and other kind of things that shouldn't be here. What are invasive species? And I noticed that the rivers and bayous part of that really was not doing well at all, and that's a real concern.
Invasive species are species of plants and animals and microorganisms that are brought to the Houston-Galveston region by people, and they come from other parts of the world. So these are species that are not native to the Houston.
Why is it a danger? I mean, it's kind of raised as red flags, and why is it important to kind of know about those?
Well, invasive species can have a number of negative impacts, including ecological impacts, negative impacts on the environment. They can also be detrimental to the economy and society at large.
What are you hoping that people, when they go to the website, and you've got a good website for this, what do you hope that people will be able to do from this? Do you want to give them some sense of advocacy to go ahead and kind of take their own steps to try to improve the quality of the bay and the rivers and bayous?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the things with the report card is knowledge. We want people to understand why the bay has a grade of a C for its health, how it can be improved, and we have a whole list of small things that people can do in their day-to-day lives to help improve the bay, ranging from coming out to a volunteer restoration event, helping plant marsh grass, or adjusting the way they water their lawn or they fertilize their lawn. All those little things can have a big impact on the bay when you're talking about 6 million people who live right in the Houston-Galveston area.
And we're growing, so it becomes a bigger issue, does it not, when you have people coming in, those of us who are here and so forth can kind of educate each other?
Every day it becomes a bigger issue. You know, Houston's a great place to live. More and more people want to live here, but more and more people are putting a little bit of pressure on Galveston Bay, and the concern is that we've made some improvements on things like water quality. We want to make sure we don't backslide, and so there's an opportunity for the average person to get involved.
Talk about the website that you have and where people can go to get more information specifically about the report card.
The website for the report card specifically is GalvBayGrade, galvbaygrade.org. Our little summary sheet of the report card is just a page and a half, but we've got nearly 100 pages of information on the website. And there's a lot of great things that you can do. In addition to learning, you can kind of be interactive, and Lisa can talk about the watershed stuff on there.
That's right. We have a really neat tool this year called the Find Your Watershed tool. So folks can go to the website, click on Find Your Watershed. They can enter the address of where they live, where they work, where they go to school, find out what watershed they live in and what the grades were for their watershed. So it's a lot of fun.
And then just briefly, watershed. A lot of people may not even understand what that word is. All of us live in watersheds, and what it means is that when it rains, where does the rain go? When it drains off your lawn, when it drains off your street, it drains down to a bayou in Houston somewhere, and so that bayou ultimately drains into Galveston Bay. So the big watershed is Galveston Bay, but there are sub-watersheds. Like I live near Brays Bayou, so I live near the Brays Bayou watershed that drains into Galveston Bay.
And the Trinity River is one of those that drains into Galveston, so that's what means that the watershed goes all the way up beyond Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Yeah, right. That's where we get into the more than half the population of the state of Texas lives in the Galveston Bay watershed, because the Trinity River is the primary source of fresh water for Galveston Bay. So anybody who lives in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, anybody who lives in the Houston-Galveston Metroplex, that is the Galveston Bay watershed.
Well, I want to thank you, obviously, for being here. This is a great report. I know we're looking forward to doing more like this with the support of people like the Houston Endowment who support you this time around, and that's a great start for this.
Houston Endowment has been a wonderful supporter of a lot of things that we do, and they're the primary and the sole supporter of the report card at this point. So we've been really privileged to work together, Galveston Bay Foundation and Houston Advanced Research Center, and it's all thanks to Houston Endowment.
Good deal. We look forward to continued reports, and we want to improve these grades, or all of you are going to be a restriction coming forward. I had to be on it, so I don't know why you wouldn't be either. Thank you, Bob, Lisa, for what you do, and thank you for being here. I want to thank you for being here as well. We're online. Reminder, next week we've got the Newsmakers online because of the Olympics, the games in Rio, exclusively here on Channel 2 until the closing ceremonies. Excitement every night, keeping us all up late. We'll continue to have live reports from our anchors. You'll be able to see the Special Olympic Zone program focusing on our local athletes and much more Monday through Saturday at 6:30 p.m. We do hope that you'll tune in. By the way, if you'd like to see previous shows or get information on today's program, you can always go to click2houston.com and under the news banner, click on Newsmakers. Thank you for watching. We'll see you right here next time on click2houston.com.